Hey, Johnny. Good morning for me, and good evening to you.
Yeah, good evening indeed. It's dark here, nearly tea time. How you doing?
Doing pretty well. Yeah, it's happy it's a Friday, and been a nice, pretty relaxing 2024 so far for me. How about you?
It's been hectic. I kicked off a new project last week, and it's been non-stop chaos ever since. So a little bit less relaxing, but it's all good. It's good to be busy.
Yeah, I mean, at least it makes the time fly, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Now, is this number two or number three for you coming back on the stream? At least the second time.
Uh, yeah, this is second time round. So it was forever ago. It feels like I did. What did I do? Introducing paginated reports, and I think that would be nearly 2 years ago now. So thanks for having me back. I must have done an all right job.
Yeah, well, it's also just like it never feels like it's been that long of a time, but yeah, two. I think I've been doing this is the start of my third year. I've because I started in November of 23, 21 with Matthew Roach. So yeah, this is a little over 2 years now. I've been doing these almost consistently every week. I think when I started back up with this, I very much had the idea like there's no way I'm going to keep finding people to fill up the time with on a weekly basis. I'll either run out of speakers or topics, but this far later, I still have 3 months of things scoped out, and I'm always with the products evolving as much as they do. Never a hard time to find topics for people to fill it in with. I think.
Yeah, never going to run out of content.
Exactly. Yeah. But I'm glad to get you back on again for sure. I think as I continue to try to move myself into the streams into the space more of Azure and non direct Power BI topics and just more of the Microsoft ecosystem, it's always a great opportunity to be able to work with others like yourself who do more of that exploration in other parts of the analytics space that's not just in Power BI, and it involves some more of the backend things as well, especially with Azure. So looking forward to this topic today.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, I guess for people that don't know me already, you can see on my on the screen there, I've got a couple of little schools surrounding my name. So, I guess my sort of like public personas, Grayscale Analytics. I have a website at grayscaleanalytics.com. I do have a YouTube channel, but I've not posted anything to it for over a year now. So I need to get back on that. But primarily, that sort of public-facing persona has always been about Power BI. And actually, from a professional perspective, I've have pretty much always done more than that. So I've never just been solely a Power BI developer. Sort of 7 or 8 years ago, I was doing kind of on-premise SQL Server data warehousing type things. As sort of technologies have changed and we've moved to the cloud, I've done sort of things with Databricks, a little bit of Synapse, and then when Fabric came along, it was been fantastic for me because with being a big Power BI geek, and then basically all the new functionality that comes in with Fabric. Well, I'm already working with Data Factory anyway. Um, as I say, already doing a bit with Databricks and Synapse as well. So the whole
Mhm.
sort of notebook and engineering experience in Fabric is relatively familiar to me. And yeah, it's been sort of exciting to start, I guess, expanding the topics that people like me will cover in a public-facing way.
Yeah, I mean it's a double-edged sword. There is a greatly broadened range of the art of possible of what can be done now with Fabric, and in pretty much every way more easily than what you could have done similarly, but more in the Azure space. But it also can definitely be daunting for a lot of people. So I think a lot of these streams that I do with you and others are hopefully just ways to help the everyone tuning in now or watching later just to familiarize themselves with what integrations are available, and then they can make the informed decision on what would make sense for them and for their organization. Also, just for curiosity, is the I love DBT? How often do you change that sign? Like, is it a very topical sign for whatever you happen to be talking about?
So this was a Christmas gift. So this sort of tends to be just something I've only started having this year. But yeah, I try and keep it topical. So yeah, up until yesterday, it said I love AA. So AA, Advancing Analytics. That's yeah, Grayscale's kind of like my public persona, as it were, with the logo that way.
Yep.
Um, but it's advancing analytics who are data engineering, analytics, and AI consultancy who I actually work for. So it said I love AA until this morning, and now it says I love DBT.
Nice. Okay. So it is something where you have like a little case, a box of letters that you can swap out. And does it is there a light that actually turns on in that, or is it just a
Yeah, the
sign?
light is turned on, but you can't see it very well. So it changes color and all sorts.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I would say the green actually stands out super well. Like you can definitely tell. Yeah, with the green, you 100% now can tell that there's a light on. The blue, you can't really see.
Yeah, so that's trying to be sort of purpley.
And then
What else have I
yeah,
got?
the red, any of those other ones look good for sure.
Right. On your advice, I'm going to stick with the green for the time being. That's
Yeah, excellent.
kind of fabricy. Anyway, I've gone with purple to match. Grayskull as a brand, but yeah, green looks nice. I'll go with
That's
that.
fun. Excellent.
Sweet.
But yeah, can starting from the conversation, I think is a great segue just with the sign is the what is DBT? I think of it, coming from my background before I knew what it was related to software is dialectical behavioral therapy, a very technical term just to say it's a type of therapy you can provide for people who are going through counseling or anything with like trauma related stuff. But that was the only initial that I was familiar with that with before I learned of what it meant in Azure.
Sure. So I very, very recently found out, and this kind of plays havoc with the title of the live stream. So, Reed, what does DBT stand for?
Yeah, and that's where exactly.
Data build tool. You'd
Yeah.
probably say. So it was like it's not a new tool. It's been around for like 6 or 7 years, pushing 8 years, I think. It
Hmm.
was a company called Fishtown Analytics who built it originally, and they called it DBT, Data Build Tool, and it took off and sort of gained a load of popularity. So they kind of changed the identity of their company. They're now called DBT Labs. They now don't just
Hmm.
do DBT, but they do other products as well. And if you flip over to my screen briefly, like literally, this tweet that I've got on my screen is what's that? Nearly 18 months old from 2022. And apparently, at the point at which they changed the identity of the company and just became DBT Labs as opposed to Fishtown Analytics, they also said actually DBT doesn't stand for Data Build Tool anymore. It's just DBT is just the name of our company. It doesn't specifically mean that because they have got all sorts of different products now as well. But yeah, originally it was intended to be a data build tool. I guess in terms of what it actually does, like the idea behind it,
Oh, and actually, one just a
we
little interesting just comment on the tweet is they mentioned it's not an acronym, but it is an initialism technically between the two. Is what is it? If you pronounce it like FBI is an initial, but if you said Phoebe, that would be an acronym. It's whether or not you pronounce it phonetically or just say the letters.
true on a technicality, but by all accounts, they're just saying, yeah, DBT is just DBT, which I'm not sure makes much sense, but that is what it
Can you
is.
zoom in just a little bit on the maybe pop it up to like 120 resolution on the web page? There you go. Beautiful. Oh, interesting. It
There
changes the
is.
graphics when you zoom in.
Was that cool? Hang on, I feel like I want to do it again. Oh, it
What?
did.
It looks better when you're zoomed in. Like there's actual graphics at that resolution, and it's just a black screen without it. Huh?
Brilliant.
I've never seen that before.
I don't think I have. That's the first time I've noticed it, in fact. That is
Hmm.
pretty cool. What is DBT? So, originally called Data Build Tool, and certainly the original version of it is still does that. It is, they describe it as a SQL first transformation tool. Now, one of the common ways you'll see it described is it does the T in ETL. So you can't use it to extract data from somewhere. You can't like data factory copy activity, or if you're using Power Query, you can't connect it to a source and bring data in. But if you've already imported your data into somewhere, you can use it to do the transformation steps on top of that data. So when we're into the realms of Fabric, we're using things like medallion architecture, where we might bring our raw data into bronze and we might clean it into silver. And then in the gold layer of the lake house, we want to model it. DBT is a potentially great tool to use for doing that modeling in the gold layer to flip the shape of the data and go from it being a sort of transactional format into that star schema for doing things like Power BI semantic models. So that's kind of what it is. in terms of sort of my expertise, so I kind of sort of said there before, I've got all this wealth of experience in terms of, not just Power BI. I've always done sort of full stack development. DBT is new to me. So this has been quite an exciting journey for me because everybody's been learning Fabric and all the sort of new elements to that. And this has been a voyage of discovery for me in terms of me picking up a new tool and me learning it, which is like, I don't know about you, but for me, like sort of that opportunity to learn a new skill can sometimes be a really satisfying thing to do. But I guess, certainly standing here today, it's not really about me sort of saying I am the DBT expert. This is more kind of my discovery of it and using it in the context of Fabric and sort of why I think it's good, and I guess some prompts and some resources so that people can explore it themselves in their own time, as it were. So I have got a demo I can show you because that's the way we go. So,
and I just have one quick question for you, and maybe this will be a deeper dive that we can go into more during the QA. But you mentioned it's certainly a piece of software that you can use and integrate as part of your ETL process. I have seen people start to talk about ELT a bit more as also a way to approach that. I'm as more of a newer order, and I've just wondered if you had any opinions on like ELT versus ETL.
So do I have opinions on it? I definitely have opinions on it. I like Chris Wagner's view of the world, where he basically says there's no such thing as ETL or ELT. Ultimately, regardless of the order of the letters, you're still loading the data somewhere. You're still extracting, transform, and loading it somewhere. That might be in memory as opposed to being, a physical materialization. But ETL still is still ETL. And this idea that you extract it, load it, and then transform it doesn't necessarily make much sense because that transformation step still has to be loaded somewhere somehow, even if that's a virtualized view of the world and it gets loaded on runtime into memory. It's still exported first and then transformed and loaded. So I guess from a traditional data warehousing perspective, that you used to, when you did the extracts, you'd transform it almost on the fly before you loaded it in.
Yep.
And now with that sort of data lakehouse pattern, because you tend to just bring all of the data through completely untransformed, when you sort of put that into your bronze layer, and then you might do a little bit of cleaning, and then before you do your modeling, this kind of concept of, well, actually you're extracting it and then loading it and then transforming it. Really what you're doing is you're extracting it, loading it, transforming it, loading it. So it's actually ELTL, really.
And I mean, as you mentioned, like, it goes with the medallion architecture. It's the downloading initial data, and to a degree, it's a bit more bottleneck proof because it in perfectly designed queries with like Power Query or something, you can have query full data and all that stuff that you can still extract, you can transform on the fly, but people often just don't know how to do that. So then they get queries that take 45 minutes. But if you just dump the data first, have it run locally, and then doing stuff on top of that, you'll often be able to just get faster results. So Microsoft's definitely encouraging that load raw data in the bronze layer, then transform it basically in-house in your own tenant, rather than trying to do it on the fly from the source system. But it's a little bit of a shift. But as you mentioned from Chris Webb, end of the day, it all ends up there. It's just what's the exact order, and is there an extra dump your data into the local lake before you do anything?
Yeah, totally. I still use ETL even for people that call it an ELT pattern. I just say ETL for everything, really.
It's a universal term, yeah.
Everyone knows what we mean.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I guess my interest in DBT came from the fact that Matt Pryor announced the fact that it was going to be available in Fabric. So it's been, I think I mentioned, it's about 8 years old now, and it's become increasingly trendy. I joke about it being a hipster BI tool, and because I drink craft beer and I have a big beard and a twirly moustache, and I'm very much a hipster. That was like, oh, I've got to use the hipster BI tool DBT. I dabbled with it a little bit in Databricks land, but not really done too much with it. But seeing it announced as being available in Fabric was ultimately the thing that got me actually starting to use it for the first time and get interested in it. So
Okay.
talking about levels of experience, this is from the 1st of August last year. That is basically pretty much the extent of my experience so far, and this will be sort of the journey through that experience.
Beautiful. Yeah,
Um,
I think the context was great just to know what got you interested and where was the initial buy-in for sure.
yeah, totally. Yeah, as I say, it kind of been on my radar for ages because, like, certainly people using other data stack technologies seem to be quite big fans of it, and it just never made its way into any of the ecosystems that I'd been working on from a data platform perspective. But it's here now. This
And just
initial release in gone.
and I was just going to say one 5 second plug for Mark. For those who may or may not have missed it, I nicknamed him the Master of Puppets. One, metal reference, but two, he does the little puppet shows, and you might, some of those people might have seen that Christmas special that I had with the Muppet. That was Mark, with the puppet talking during that entire Christmas special that I had a few weeks back. He's an absolute like, he's a gem. One of my favorite people now.
His fancy dress for things like the Sequel Bits party is always off the chart as well. His
Yes,
costume at Sequel Bits last year was insane,
he
stilts
loves
and
dressing
all
up.
sorts.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, he's a good guy. Yeah, this announcement anyway was for there's almost two versions of DBT. There's DBT Core, which is open source, free, anyone can access it. Um, it's an open source project, and it's how DBT started life as an open source tool. And this initial announcement was effectively support for DBT Core. So effectively, it runs as a Python library that you can connect up to a Fabric data warehouse, and that's how you run it. There is DBT Cloud, and when Ignite was happening, they announced that DBT Cloud is now available for Fabric as well. So that gives you like a full online integrated development experience. So as opposed to downloading software locally and using, I'll be demonstrating using Visual Studio Code. There's like a full integrated online version that you can now use, and that now works with Fabric too. If you want to play about with that, so even though this is kind of the licensed version, to have an account for an individual license is free as well. So that individual licensing for DBT Cloud, and I still haven't played about with it properly yet, to be honest. But as an individual, you can go in and it gives you the ability to have one DBT project with one target warehouse to point it
mm,
at. Um, and if you want to kind of explore the features of DBT Cloud and see, how that might fit in terms of whether or not you might want to invest in the cloud platform, it at least gives you a flavor of what's available. But it's things like the fact that it's cloud hosted. It's better for like collaboration, so you can set up a project and share that with other people. And if you're working in a team of engineers that needs to work on the same project, you can share it via that means. So that's just sort of worthwhile pointing out that you can do it in the cloud space as well. But yeah, I'm going to show off the DBT Core free version today, so it'll be anyone
perfect.
can have a look at it.
And I dropped the link into
So
the chat as well for that.
yeah, cool. DBT Cloud looks really, really, really great. I honestly have not really had much chance to dive into the pricing model of it to understand how viable it is in terms of whether or not it will work for small teams or big organizations and things like that. But certainly DBT Core, as long as you're happy to forego all this sort of bells and whistles that go into the cloud product, um, it does the job, and hopefully I'll be able to show you. So where shall I start today? I'm going to start today with taking you into my Power BI tenant and going into a little workspace here. Note as well, let's go full zoom here. Little skull icon for my workspace. Quite happy with that. Say AI generated. In my workspace, I have got literally, I'm going to say literally one artifact. I guess it's three, but I've got a lake house here, and my lake house has got raw data in it. So I've already loaded the raw data. It is still in like a transactional format. So if I look at this, this is a load of tables from it says on the screen, wide world importers. So these are a load of tables from the wide world importers sample database with just some sample data in it. But that is just literally the raw data taken from that transactional system. There's not been any transformation done or any data modeling or anything like that. This really isn't in a fit state to want to build out a Power BI semantic model with it. Just to give a bit of context in terms of what that looks like. So this is just, it's not the full database, this is just the tables that I've imported. And I kind of kept it deliberately small because bigger things can go more wrong. So, but yeah, just to give you an idea, we're not talking about a star schema here. We're very much talking, a transactional system with various joins and levels of normalization going on. And obviously, as an analytics professional and as a Power BI geek, I want to turn this into a nice star schema format. I want to heed the words of Matthew Roach in terms of doing my transformation as far upstream as possible. So rather than transforming it in Power BI, let's transform it in Fabric first. And I'm going to attempt to do that today. Fingers crossed, live demos, things might go wrong, but hopefully this is all going to wow everybody.
Pray to the demo gods.
Yeah, this is all going to be done using DBT. So I have gone really, really basic on this to start with, in so much as here is Visual Studio, and literally I'm pointing at an empty folder in Visual Studio. Just so there's no smoke and mirrors, there is nothing in this folder, and I've got Visual Studio connected to it. First thing I'm going to do is fire up my Power BI again, because I didn't mean to close that window anyway. And in my workspace, I'm going to create a new warehouse. And I'm going to call that warehouse, heard earlier, DWWH 200 read Livestream. Has anybody seen, say has anybody, I haven't got the chat switched on read, so I can't actually see who's about. Hi to everybody who's watching. But I don't know if people have seen that I did a blog last year about naming conventions for Fabric artifacts. We try and use a convention where we call out the experience. This is going to be the data warehousing experience.
Yep.
The artifact, so it's warehouse. The 200 is the fact that my raw lake house is set to the 100, and so 200 is going to be the next step. And then read livestream is just because during the read livestream. So I'm going to get that warehouse spun up. First thing that I need is somewhere to transform my data to and actually run it. So whilst that is spinning itself up, and again, praying to the demo gods, hopefully that will be spun up by the time we are ready to actually use it. Oh, there we go. That was nice and quick. Well done, Microsoft people. That was impressive. Visual Studio itself. So, or Visual Studio Code. There are some prerequisites that you're going to need to be able to use this. They're listed on, there's like a how-to guide on the Fabric blog in terms of how to get yourself started. You need to have some kind of IDE installed. So it doesn't have to be Visual Studio Code. I think every demo I've ever seen, people have used Visual Studio Code, but you could, for instance, use Atom or something like that. As long as you've got some kind of developer IDE, some kind of development tool to run all of this in. VS Code, as I say, is probably the most common. So you need something of that ilk installed. You need to have Python installed. So you need to have Python installed on the machine you're going to be using it. I fell down a hole yesterday when I was sort of practicing for this live stream because I've been setting up a new laptop and I didn't have Python installed. And when I went to install it, it by default installed the most recent version, which is Python 3.12. And DBT is not compatible with Python 3.12. It's only compatible up to Python 3.11 at the moment. So don't be me panicking that you're supposed to be doing a live stream the next day and nothing's working because you've got your Python compatibility level wrong. Yeah. Make sure that you're 3.11. I think it can be anywhere between 3.7 and 3.11 if you've got older versions already installed. But yeah, 3.11 is the most recent version it works with. And then just the other thing that you need to download as well is the SQL ODBC connector. So there's a Microsoft SQL ODBC connector. Ultimately, it needs that connector to read your Fabric warehouse, because we're going to be using the SQL endpoint for that data warehouse. I guess as well, like, I feel like I potentially skipped ahead slightly there. It is worth noting that the DBT integration is with data warehousing. So you can't use DBT on top of a lakehouse. It does need to be on top of Synapse data warehousing, and that's because it uses the SQL endpoint. Lakehouses, you can't use the SQL endpoint to to write tables. You can use the SQL endpoint for reading, but you can't use it for writing. So it has to be for the data warehouse experience that you use this.
Yeah, I mean, and just to paraphrase and summarize what you said is, yeah, the lake houses, they both have SQL endpoints. Lake houses are read only, warehouses are read write. It is a traditional database where stored procedures, things like this, all of the database tools works in a warehouse. You can only extract data out of a warehouse, and you have to use the Fabric portal to put data into a warehouse for the most part.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, I guess me talking about the fact that DBT is a SQL first tool. Yeah, it's designed to work with that data warehousing experience. First thing I'm going to do in Visual Studio Code is I'm going to create a Python virtual environment. So this is just basically looking at my Python library. It's good practice. You don't have to use a virtual environment to do this, but it is good practice, because then you can effectively isolate what packages you've got installed. You know that you're not going to end up with clashes if you're working on a different project that uses different Python libraries that might not be compatible. Using a virtual environment is just a way to keep those things separated. So virtual environment is the first thing I'm going to do. I'm then going to activate that virtual environment, which is done via PowerShell script. Hopefully. Excellent. So we can see from the terminal here in the command line that I'm now operating in this file path in this virtual environment. How's that for size? That zoomed in enough? We're looking okay? I tried to make it quite big already.
Yeah, perfectly adequate.
Awesome. So we've got a virtual environment up and running. First thing we actually need to do is install the DBT Python package. So we use the command pip install, because I've already done it before. It's trying to preempt it. Now you could pip install the full DBT connectors, but they tend to have sort of like database specific versions that you should do. So it's the DBT Fabric version that we want installed, because we're going to be using the Fabric connectors. Just literally off the back of that pip install, it should go off and do it. And again, because I've done this already this week, this should be all cached on my machine, and it should install it relatively quickly. Because I think the first time I did this, it took about 5 minutes, and that would make a very boring live stream.
A few times when I see like data like that scrolling down, it feels like, hey, I'm actually coding.
Yeah.
Because it's like what you see in the movies, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The Matrix, almost. It feels like that would just be a good one of the days when people actually worked in real offices. You could just install some packages in Python when your boss walks past, and they'll look like you're trying to do some work.
Oh, they have plugins for Chrome and other stuff where you basically have a little icon on the top, and if somebody starts to get, you just click a button or click a hotkey, and it just full screens busy code that basically just plays a looping animation.
Yeah, awesome. Right, cool. That has finished installing. If we use the command pip list, it will give us a list of the packages that have been installed. So it doesn't just install DBT. It has installed DBT core and the DBT fabric elements as well, but also a load of dependencies and things like that it's going to need. So I'm going to just where am I going? I'm going to kill it. Clear the terminal just to keep that nice and tidy, so that you can see what I'm doing. So I've installed DBT, got my virtual environment up and running. DBT's installed as a package as part of my environment. I want to create myself a new DBT project. So the way I can do that is using this command. Hope it's not selected. Oh, wow. That's my terminal being wacky.
Remind
The
you to make
command's
a
DB.
sacrifice to the data god or to the demo gods.
Yeah, let's go with it.
I got plenty of little plushies now to sacrifice.
Here we go. Cool. So DBT in it. That's almost does what you'd expect it to do. Is initiating a DBT project. It's going to firstly ask for name of the project. So I'm going to call it read Livestream as well. Oh, nice. So this is the bit where the demo gods have let me down slightly. There is already a profile in there. Now, quite often what this does is it sort of says, you've created a new project and we need to set up a profile for you, and it would walk you through the steps to set up the profile. But I've already done the profile, so I don't need to do it. Now, the profile doesn't sit inside of your project. So if you can imagine that all the files that I'm going to build as part of my project now will land inside of this folder, and you'll see them in Visual Studio. The profile itself sits outside of that. It sits in a user location, and annoyingly, with the really annoyingly with the Fabric connector, it doesn't allow you to build those profiles. You have to do them manually. So with the Databricks connector, it literally says, we need to build the profile. What's the name of the profile? And then it asks you for your connection details. So it'll ask you for the connection string that you need to do it, and ask you various questions to set the model up. And this doesn't currently for the Fabric package. You just have to go off and set it up. So it's just literally things like giving it a profile. You have to name the profile here, and then give it things like your username. I'm going to authenticate using Active Directory, the driver that I want to use, and then the connection string and things like that here. So that already exists, so I don't have to set it up. But it would normally prompt you and tell you to do that. Again, there's instructions on how to set this up on the Microsoft websites as well. So having initiated that, I'm going to close that as well. You'll see we've got a new folder pop up. And this new folder, just from running that db init command, will set up all sorts of things. So it gets various folders set up for you to save various artifacts to. We have this project level folder, which sort of contains project level type things. So if you want to use a different profile, you can change that here. We've got the profile name. You can change the paths if you want to in terms of what sits in which folders in the project, but this is how it's been set up. Clean targets, so there's things that get removed when you do a build, so you can set things up there as well. Just the one thing I'm going to do, I am going to make a little change here, and I'll explain what it. In fact, I'll show you this bit first. In these folders on the left, apart from some git keep examples, they're mostly empty, but it always loads your first initiation with some sample code in it. So it gives you some examples to give you an idea of what it is you need to do, and some of the syntax that you want to do. And effectively, it is just writing SQL. So we've got a CTE, common table expression here, where it defines some data and then selects from the CTE. And then we've got a second one as well. I always liken this to working with database projects in SQL Server. It's almost like you would define your tables and your queries and your structure of your data in SQL Server projects, and you might build some views and some stored procedures to populate it. So it's very similar to that. It's very SQL based. It uses this kind of Ginger reference model effectively, where you can build out dependencies between different parts of your model by using these references. So you'll see these sort of curly bracketed references all over the projects. But ultimately, we don't want this example. We don't want this example project. We need to get rid of it effectively. So first off, I want to delete it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat very slightly, because I'm going to bring into this some stuff that I've already built. So I'm not building this entirely from scratch. Where am I going? Me losing where I'd put it. So into this models folder, I have just pulled in some stuff that I've already done. So there is guidance from DBT in terms of the ways to structure your projects. Quite often inside of the models, they sort of recommend you possibly set it up with a source folder to define your data sources, a transform folder to do all of your transformations, and then a macros folder where you actually create your final tables to load up. I personally have taken a naming convention where I use the convention we use at Advancing Analytics for our medallion architecture. So we don't use bronze, silver, gold. We use raw, base, and curated. So ordinarily, I would be getting the data from my base layer, and then I'd be posting it to my curated layer. So in the base folder itself, I've got this YAML file. All this YAML file is doing is saying that for these particular sources, it's giving the sources a name. It's saying that that's the lake house that the sources are in, and then these are the names of all the tables. And just by literally declaring those inside of that sources file and making them available to be referenced by all of the transformations I want to do. So I don't need to fully define all those tables. I just need to have them sort of declared somewhere so that they can form part of the dependencies. Making sense?
Yeah, I like your organization at least. I mean, I'm very much in favor of foldering based off of what was the word that you used similar with your naming convention with warehouse objects? The first two letters which is like
Oh, the
warehouse,
experience.
then the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's some type of logical theme. It really helps to you're following a path to get to the information you need.
Yeah, totally. So I have a folder where I declare my sources, which would be in my base layer of my lake house. And then this curated folder is effectively where I'm going to actually do my transformations and build my dimensional model. So that ERD diagram we looked at before, and those sort of several tables that we had there in the diagram, I want to denormalize that and turn that into a smaller footprint. So I'm just going to have a factor table for my orders, and then dimension tables for customer date and product. Now, there is just one thing that I need to change in my project file, which is this is basically saying that for the example folder, materialize everything as a view, and I have deleted my example folder, so that's not going to work anyway. But also, my preference is to materialize these as tables. So rather, a lot of the way that sort of the DBT community seems to work is that when they build these kind of models on top of their raw data, rather than actually materialize those as tables, they'll almost use sort of virtualization and have it as a set of views instead. I guess
Okay.
people using sort of SQL Server as a source and importing it into something like Power BI in import mode might sometimes do that as well. You'll have a view that defines it, and then obviously that gets loaded physically into Power BI. My preference in terms of that kind of pattern of whether or not you should do it virtually as a view or materialized as a table, my default stance would be, yeah, you should do it as tables. It's going to then store that down, v-order it. Direct Lake doesn't support views anyway, so we definitely want to, if we want to use Direct Lake for our semantic model further down the line,
Yep.
we definitely want to have that materialized as tables. So I need to make just that small change that small change there on that particular file. And then I can step you through what I've done. So I've built out a customer dimension here. I've given it, you can do this thing where you can tag your entities. So I've given this a dimension tag. Again, in DBT land, there's this kind of convention that when you bring tables in, you create them as CTEs in the first instance and reference them there. So for this particular entity, I'm saying that I'm bringing through my customers table from Wild World Importers, the categories and the buying groups tables. And then again, this is almost a DBT convention. This is just almost the way the community from a DBT perspective have kind of evolved their best practices, is that the actual query you want to build, you do it in a CTE called final. So I'm using a row number here to create myself a surrogate key for my customer. Then I've got things like my customer ID and the customer details I want. And then I'm joining all that data together. And then we select that into a final one here as well. So you've got a customer dimension. My date doesn't really have much of a source table. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be querying my sales orders table and figuring out the date range that's in the table. And then I'm going to build out a fully featured date table with things like date, year, quarter, month, all those typical things. Again, just doing that using SQL. And again, with DirectLake currently, it doesn't like you using dates in your relationships. So I'm converting my date into a smart surrogate key there with this line here. And again, once we've defined that and done our transformation logic use in SQL, we select from that final CTE. Again, products got a few more tables added to it, but we ultimately join all those things together. And then fact orders again does the same thing. And you can see from this that it references as you go. So this idea from a data warehousing perspective, if you're generating surrogate keys and your dimensions, when you load your facts, you need to look up the surrogate key. So this is doing a reference back to because as it stands right here and right now, this dim customer table doesn't exist anywhere, but the fact that I can use this reference to it helps it to parse it okay. So that's kind of me. For every table that I would like to write into my warehouse, me writing effectively a SQL query that defines what the table is going to be. We also get here this schema file as well. So the schema file is interesting because it allows you to add some documentation in there too. So we can start adding things like descriptions of the columns and things like that, and various other things that we might want to do. So having gotten a project pulled together now, if I come down in my command line here, I can use the command dbt build. Right, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself in the right directory. So it's basically to run the command, I need to navigate to the directory that's got all the files in, which is actually this Livestream one, because it's this one here. I can, in fact, just to make sure that this is going to work okay, if I use dbt debug, I'm going to check all of my dependencies and make sure it can find all the files that it's expecting, that I've got all the right things in place for it to run. Also, because I'm doing this with Active Directory authentication, is going through my two-factor authentication. So this isn't me checking my Twitter. This is me doing my two-factor authentication on my phone. Because it's just basically checking my connection and making sure that I've got the right access to be able to do it. And I need to thumbprint it too. Cool. So that's saying, right, yeah, all your dependencies there, all's good. So if I now run dbt build, this is going to run through and actually run my project and publish it up to my Lakehouse. So annoyingly, it's going to make me authenticate again. You don't have to use Active Directory integration to it. The best practice really is to use a service principal, but for the sake of doing a demonstration, that seemed like a little bit of overkill. So I'm just using Active Directory.
And it's like it, and we're still saying Active Directory too. It's really, I'm struggling so hard to say Entra now.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. So
Microsoft's
that
like,
has
man,
all
you
come.
had a name for 10 years. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Right, okay, cool. Right, we should now, if I go up to my warehouse, which was previously completely empty and didn't have anything in it,
Mm-hmm.
we've got some tables appeared. So by running that DBT build, it's built my tables. Again, for me, that's not that exciting. It's kind of when I was used to using SQL projects, that's what SQL projects did as well. But it's not just built the table, it's populated the table. It actually has loaded the data into it as well. So it's built it and loaded it. So it's not just a kind of design tool, or not just sort of the code for the structure of the table. It's the actual doing the transformation and doing it itself. And that's all there. We're all good to go. So that kind of end to end shows that we can build out and populate a warehouse using DBT. That for me, none of that is really what's exciting about it. I don't think anything that I've demoed, having gone from no lake house to a populated lake house and run that a little bit, that was a little bit of a whistle stop tour. And as I say, from my old school data warehousing days and using SQL projects, this is really giving me anything extra? Is it, is it what makes this more exciting? And the answer is actually there's a load of other stuff that's really, really worthwhile showing. So I get geeky these days about the discipline of analytics engineering. So I've started last year referring to myself as an analytics engineer. And when we talk about analytics engineering, what we really sort of mean is we are looking to bring engineering practices into our analytics. So from a software engineering perspective, that means things like good source control practices. So the fact that we can upload this to Git and source control it is a good practice from an engineering perspective. Some kind of automation. So we want to not just have some controls around this, but actually we want to build some scripts out that are going to help us do things quicker and avoid repeatable tasks. And then the other sort of element from an analytics engineering perspective is maintaining good documentation and making sure that our solutions are easy to understand and pass on to people. So this is where, for me, DBT starts to shine, because, like I say, so far, for me, that hasn't really given you anything exciting. But if I start looking at things like this schema file, I've got, you might have spotted it when I looked at it before, we can start checking things to make sure we've got sort of data quality tests in there as well. So I need to make sure that my stock items are never null, because they should never ever be null in a stock item. So I'm just going to borrow this really, really, really quickly. I know that product color here, I happen to know that my product color does contain some null values, but if I put this test in to say, right, don't deploy this if it's not null, there's a couple of things I can do. I can do DBT test to run my tests. So you can just test in isolation if you want to make sure that you're happy with the work. It's asking me to authenticate again. This is the point where I regret not setting up a service principal and doing it properly instead.
Yeah, very few things have gone wrong as far as this goes. So, the demo gods have been happy today.
Yeah, cool. Okay, we failed a test now. So if you can think about using best practice analyzer in Tabular Editor, you can have these tests as well, so that you can set things up in that are rules that are saying, actually, if it fails a rule, first of all, kind of flag it up from a development perspective, so it gives you the chance to address it early. But also, when we use that DBT build command, it runs the tests as well. So I can test in isolation without trying to do a deployment. But if I run DBT build, it runs the tests first as well, so that basically if it fails a test before it does the deployment, it will do that. Now, out of the box, there aren't that many tests available. Like, literally, it will check for nulls, and I think it might check for duplicates. I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head, which is bad. I should have researched it better. But those tests just come out of the box, and you can apply them to your schema and make sure that you check for them. But down here, you've got this tests folder whereby you can
Okay.
define your own custom tests if you want to. So where I talked about the fact that I'm still a bit of a DBT newbie, I haven't yet built my own tests. So I'm not going to demonstrate that now. But the idea is that you can start building out logic that says that when I do a deployment, you could do things like check that all of the column names start with a capital letter, for argument's sake, and if it comes across something that doesn't, it's going to fail your tests, that kind of thing. So from an analytics engineering perspective, it passes the automated testing element, which is good. What about the automation element? So from an automation element, you can create macros. So it has this Ginger language that supports macros. I have got, what do I want to call this?
It reminds me a little bit of, just for people who are more from the Power BI side, it's like a lot of your tests are like the BPA that you have built into Tabular Editor, best practices analyzer. There's a lot of out of the box, like these are pretty universal things that you might want to do against a table, but you could script any of your own qualifying checks. If is number, things like that. Whatever you need to know that tells you the red flag that you're now ingesting bad data or incomplete data into your system.
Yeah, no, exactly. Right, I'm just going to check one thing really, really quickly. Yeah, okay, cool. So I can create, define using this SQL file, this idea of a macro, which is a little bit like writing your own functions. And the idea being that once you write out these macros, that is, again, from this engineering practices perspective, this idea of if you come across dry principle, do not repeat yourself. So I have here this macro that because Direct Lake doesn't like dates in relationships and you have to create a date key, I can build myself a little macro that will do that for me automatically. So if I sort of define that like that and save it, and I come back to my in my models, in my date dimension, rather than repeating all of that code there, which is quite verbose, that's quite a long function to do it. I've now got myself a macro written so that I can save myself some keystrokes, reuse that piece of code multiple times in multiple places. I, as a matter of fact, not only have a smart key in my date dimension, but I do it here in my orders as well. So if I can grab that. And then I should be able to, yes, I do want to save it. Should be able to, and this is again praying to those demo gods. If I hit my DBT build now, hoping that should rebuild. I've changed my code so that I'm using the macro instead, but it should all run and compile all okay. Who likes two-factor authentication? Who loves it? Who thinks it's the best thing ever?
So the only way, and I actually just had a rant with my friend about this recently. It's important, but the most annoying ones are those captchas where you have to click on like a bus, but the image fades out over like 5 seconds. So you click it, it slowly disappears. 5 seconds later, you get a new one, but you get a picture of a bus like 6 times back to back. So I've had captchas that have taken me nearly 1.5 minutes to complete, and it's just just take me into the portal, please. Take my password at this point. Just let me let me in. Like, God, this is so painfully slow. I don't understand the slow fade out. I'm sure there's a reason for that, but why do they make it such a slow fade to go to the next one versus just instantly flipping to it? It's got to be something to try to screw with automated software that's trying to hack it or something.
Yeah, I reckon you're right. It's like two-factor authentication ultimately is a good thing. It's just annoying. So I've set up the Authenticator app on my phone effectively. So I
Yep.
do all of my two-factor authentication via my phone. And the other day I was deep in something and I kept getting WhatsApp messages. So I was like, right, okay, put my phone in another room so I could be undisturbed and really crack on with getting this work
Yep.
done. And then as soon as I needed to two-factor authenticate, I was like, oh, I have to go get my phone now. So all of a sudden that distraction was back in the room with me.
Just quick,
Anyway, yeah,
Allison, what?
that runs.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, that ran successfully. We've deployed that. We're good. So we've demonstrated the fact that we can source control this from a Git perspective. I haven't actually set this up in a repo, but that's what you do. You stick it into GitHub or Azure DevOps or something like that. We've got some automated testing built in. So we're adopting those engineering principles. We can build ourselves macros to automate some tasks. And then kind of the last piece of that analytics engineering puzzle is documentation. So I showed before in the schema file the fact that um, we can include like descriptions for all of our columns and things like that. If I use this command dbt docs generate, this goes off and it builds a JSON file, a manifest in the background, and that JSON file, this is me authenticating again. Oh, that's me getting my password wrong. Cool. That JSON file basically contains all of that kind of additional description data that we've done. And then the other thing that JSON contains is because we've used this reference language throughout the project. So whenever we reference a source, we reference the source file. Whenever we reference a table we've already created, we reference the object that's inside of the project. And it's clever enough to understand all of that. So I can generate that document, which is pretty cool. And then this is the best bit. This is the kind of the bit that I like, sort of save the best to the last element, is you can render that documentation. No! Hang on. So this is like the best part of the whole. Here we go. That generate doc serve spins up a whole documentation website for you. Now we can look through the project, we can look at a database view. If I look at my sources, this is just giving me an idea of the sources that have all been defined. If I look at my project, I can start to see any macros I've got defined here. So there's some information around that. And dependencies as well. So I can see which models are using it. Let's
zoom in just there. Yeah, perfect.
Open up this curated model. I can see information around this. So I can see, because I use that tagging, I can see that this is a dimension, which schema it belongs to, the fact that it's a table, not a view, which project it relates to, any relations that are in there, all of my descriptions and data types as well. So I can get the descriptions out in terms of things like that. That's basically available for all of the tables in there. So you're getting this nice sort of rich data dictionary with all things like the not just the source code, but also the compiled code. So the source code is what we see when we do the developing, and then the compiled code is what it actually sends to the database when it builds. So you can sort of see what's been defined from what we've created versus what's actually been sent to the database when it actually does the compilation. And then pretty much my favorite bit is when we get to the realms of this, where it builds a whole dependency diagram. And so we can see that fact orders is dependent on our product dimension and so on and so forth, and all the tables. So all these source tables, these are the tables that are responsible for making up DIM customer. So ultimately from a analytics engineering perspective, that for me ticks all the boxes. It ticks the automation, source controlling, engineering practices, and automated testing, and then the documentation is, I think, is awesome. As it stands, when I have used this, I just use that. I run that automate that docs command just locally, and this gets spun up. You can theoretically, if you want to, go to the realms of publishing this out to a sort of static location and make that available for your users. I haven't gone that far down the rabbit hole in terms of doing it. But also, I believe that you get that if you are using DBT Cloud, this is basically built into the cloud as well, so you get to see all that documentation piece.
What's the I had someone just ask in terms of pricing, like individual enterprise things like that. So what's its integration and or pricing structure?
So I can do it like this. So developer, literally one person
Yep.
by yourself, means you can't share it. You can experiment with that for free. Team, you're looking at $100 per developer per month. No, sorry, that's a lie. That $100 per month is for up to 8 people.
So yeah, okay.
So it's not per person, that's per team, with some limitations on what you can do. And then yeah, enterprise, come and ask us. So I don't know if they have this saying in the US. In the UK, they sometimes say that if you have to ask, you probably can't afford it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've yet to go down that route yet. But certainly
I
for
think
the core,
honestly most of them, I would say like most of the time you go to the enterprise level, it you know, if you had 800 developers, so to say, it is going to be cheaper than, 100 a month times 800, whatever that it is. So that's usually why they have those, is there's some kind of a, scaled proratedness to the, we're only going to charge you probably a maximum of this, and at one point just, use as much as you want of it.
Yeah, no, totally. But yeah, that ultimately, that was me. That was me. DBT in Fabric, it works. DBT Core is open source and free anyway. There's the only thing with DBT Core is that you get into complications then in terms of management and orchestration, because in DBT Cloud, you can set your projects to run on a schedule. So if you want to update your warehouse on a daily basis, you can schedule it. Also, you can trigger it with like a webhook. So if you had a data factory pipeline and you needed to send an API call up to DBT Cloud to run the project and orchestrate it, that does that. With Core, it gets a little bit more complicated. So I've been experimenting with ways to do it in Fabric, because you can, if you've got a notebook in Fabric, you can pip install DBT into Fabric, and you can. What I've been doing is I've been working on using Azure DevOps to copy my project into OneLake, and I was getting my notebook to read OneLake to process the project. But I haven't quite got it working end to end yet. So otherwise I'd probably demo it. The alternatives is that you get into the realms of using things like Azure Function Apps, or you get into the realms of spinning up Docker containers that you can orchestrate it with. There's ways and means and techniques of orchestrating with DBT Core. Annoyingly, in Databricks supports DBT Core, so you can use a Databricks workflow, and you just literally point it to your Git repository. So you point it to GitHub, wherever you've stored your DBT project, and it will just run it for you. And I really, really, really hope that kind of the product team at Microsoft will realize the value in that, and hopefully make the integration a little bit tighter and make it easy to orchestrate. But yeah, ultimately that was me, and yeah, just to demonstrate again that we have gone from nothing in our warehouse to magically building out all our tables and importing the data and doing all of that with the power of DBT.
I think the efficiency of building the pipeline with that certainly seems to be quite an added value. And then I think, as you said, it's adding in some of those options for validations and checks, which is obviously a very important thing to do. But then you even get those extra layers of leveraging some of the diagrams and the dependencies, which helps to keep people honest and understand lineage for sure. So I like that the diagram integration of that. I did have another question from Pine Wilson on the chat. So how would you handle the orchestration and triggering of runs from Fabric?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, effectively exactly what we were just discussing.
Yeah.
There's a chap, I can't remember the guy's name. Somebody's done a blog about it and how they did it. And the
Okay.
way they did it was they had to spin up resources outside of Fabric. So they had to basically from Data Factory call, I'm sure it was an Azure Function app that basically did the orchestration for them. That Azure Function app spun up a Docker container that contained the project in it, and then effectively used the command line tool to run it. But yeah, as I say, I've been experimenting with trying to run it inside of Fabric by doing a pip install of DBT in a notebook,
Yep.
which works, all good. It's the authentication that I'm struggling with almost, believe it or not. It is the getting Fabric to talk to itself. It's almost like the notebook hasn't got access to the warehouse. But I've got a plan to get around that with the sort of some trickery with the authentication methods. I just haven't had the time to try it out yet.
So I'll be a devil's advocate and also ask have you encountered any significant limitations, or for the people who are going to explore this, are there any gotchas or anything that they should just be aware of that won't come as a surprise, or something that they won't realize until maybe they've spent a little bit too much time with the tool?
So I guess things I don't like are that its default mode of operation is to drop and recreate the tables. So if you can imagine a big factor table, if you were running that project, it would drop it and recreate it, which I don't think is particularly efficient. Now, there are patterns that you can use to do incremental loading. It's just really bizarre because everywhere you look in the DBT docs, it kind of comes with almost like a health warning that says, "Oh, you sure you want to do incremental loading? Because it's really complicated, and we just recommend you just drop and recreate every time because it keeps things simpler." And my attitude to that is no. When I did data warehousing, we loaded it incrementally as often as we could so that we were processing the smallest amount of data. The other thing is managing those surrogate keys. So again, for the sake of demonstration, I created my surrogate keys just using a row number function. There is so I guess one of the things that we didn't get onto is you can, there's like loads of open source repositories where you can download packages that have like pre-canned macros in them. So somebody somewhere, there are packages that exist that create surrogate keys for you. But the surrogate keys it creates aren't integer surrogate keys, which is what I'm used to working with. It does like these horrible concatenated string type surrogate keys, which I'm personally not a fan of. Keep having debates with people whether or not that is more or less performant. Like from a Power BI best practice perspective, I'm like, I want to use integer surrogate keys because it's the way I'm programmed. And in Fabric, from an actual performance perspective, I'm not sure it makes a difference, but it makes me feel icky. So I could do to test some of that some more. My ambition is to write some of my own packages to be able to support some of the, because that's the great thing with it, because you can write your own macros, you can supplement it as much as you like in terms of adding additional functionality. So my plan is to spend this year becoming an absolute DBT ninja, and then being able to write some packages and some macros that are going to plug the gaps that I currently find in it. But yeah, like other than that, I guess I'm still probably relatively young on my own journey, and I'm still probably in the boat where if you talk to me in a year's time, I'll tell you all the things that trip me up and all the things that were the gotchas for me. I can do a DBT gotchas series on my YouTube channel and I resurrect that.
It sounds like you're just going to be someone that if I definitely have any questions in DBT in the future, I might have to to pick your brain on LinkedIn. But
yeah, and
I
I might not
appreciate
know the answers.
Yeah.
I'll know where to look
Well,
now.
and I think you're being very transparent on, it's a new product too. It hasn't, as far as the integration with Azure, like the announcement that you showed was August of this year, so it's not exactly like it's been around for a couple of years for people to really play around with. But let's see. I have one other good question from Donald on using ADF versus or instead of DBT. If you had any thoughts on that.
Using Data Factory instead of DBT.
Yeah.
So I would say that since forever, that ADF isn't really very good at handling transformation. It excels as an orchestrator in terms of creating new workflows and doing. I'm doing. I want to try and describe orchestration without saying orchestration again, but yeah, almost that scheduling piece that can work out
Yeah.
your dependencies and do the workflow. And although you can do some simple transformations in ADF, I, for a long time, like my whole consulting career, have always been encouraged not to do that and to basically manage my transformations via some other means. So that transformations could be calling a data flow from Data Factory. It could be calling a notebook from Data Factory. It could be, if you're using a warehouse, you could build some stored procedures. So this is the bit where I plug my own wares, isn't it? I literally, if you go to advancedanalytics.co.uk and go to blogs, I think the most recent blog is a blog that I've written, which is talking about the transformation, the sort of options that are open to you in Fabric for doing that final mile of Fabric. So there isn't one well-trodden path, but I would recommend against using ADF. I'd just use ADF as a orchestration and scheduling tool, definitely.
And it's a good comparison, I think, between the two of, and also just some of the, as you mentioned, some of the limitations that the Data Factory has compared to the strengths of DBT, for sure. It looks like I see you pulling up a link. I can flip back over as we start to wrap up here as well. If you had any articles,
Yeah, cool.
to show.
Again, this is me just selling my own wares and posting the blog that I did around.
Haberdashery. That is a great
Yeah,
word of the day.
it is a great word. At Advanced Analytics, we had an internal proof of concept project for Fabric, and the project name was Haberdashery. And I was quite happy with my AI generated images that came up. So it talked about the different ways that you could do that final step. You could use notebooks like a data engineer would. You can use Power Query if you're coming from more that sort of Power BI background. Power Query is an option. If
These
you
are
have
these were
come from
all these were all OpenAI generated images, right?
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
If you've got a BI developer background like me, then you're basically using something like SQL projects with the data warehouse works. And then this is my hipster BI developer with a big beard and the twirly mustache and his plaid shirt, saying that if you want to be a bit trendy, then DBT is kind of like the new player.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So basically, your beard and just a little bit of a coif on the top.
Yeah, I mean, I'm jealous of that. If only I could have such a glorious mane as that trendy analytics engineer. I've actually got a shirt just like that as well, which is not surprising. And I do actually. If I'm doing work on camera, I don't tend to, but I am a glasses wearer as well. I want to get the shine off my things. So, but yeah, I didn't
Beautiful.
really give it much of a prompt other than to show me a trendy analytics engineer, and it pretty much did that.
Nice.
So, yeah.
No, this has all been really fantastic, and I think we got to do a good deep dive into the end-to-end process of getting something deployed into a Fabric warehouse using the DBT tool. As we kind of finish up, is there any remaining thoughts, remarks as we close up?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of that being a deep dive, that was almost for me, that's skimming the surface. I'm personally excited to be exploring it even more and using it for more of the work that I'm doing and getting to really sort of know it in depth. I guess one of the other benefits that I didn't really talk about is its portability, because DBT has got a Fabric adapter now, but it's also got a host of other adapters. So you can use it with Snowflake, you can use it with Databricks, you can use it with vanilla SQL Server. And one of the things that's potentially quite a good globe story is its portability in terms of being able to migrate something. So if you were to move from Snowflake to Fabric, for argument's sake, and you've already got a DBT project that builds tables for you in Snowflake, then as long as you're bringing the raw data into Fabric, then you can effectively sort of just repoint your project at Fabric instead and reuse all the work you've already done. So that's one of the things that we're working on. We work with a lot of Databricks, customers, and we're looking potentially as a way that we can use DBT. If we do a Databricks project, we can use DBT so that if they do decide that they actually want to switch across to Fabric at a later date, actually we can just move it with us and things like that. But yeah, other than that, there's quite a big community around DBT. It reminds me quite a lot of the Power BI community, because they have community events and meetups. Like, the people who do DBT can be quite obsessive about it almost, but that also means you've got some great resources out there to learn. So a lady called Madison Schott, she has a blog, Learn Analytics Engineering, which is a really, really great source.
What's her
there's
name?
tons of Madison Schott, so SCHOTT. She's got a really big following on LinkedIn. So she's got some great material. There's various YouTube resources. There's just tons of stuff out there to sort of get you started. You know, I've not had to go on a DBT training course to start getting familiar with this. It really has sort of got quite a good community around it, and yeah, looking forward to getting stuck in.
Just dropped a link to her LinkedIn as well in the chat, so people can go check her out. Beautiful. Then yeah, I think this has been awesome. I look forward to getting you back on, and maybe even for a deeper dive session, as you said, at some point into this, once you've added a couple more layers of depth in your expertise on this, since I'm sure the integrations will continue to get improved. But I really appreciate you taking your time out of your Friday evening to come on for this, and it's great to have you back on again.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And everyone else, enjoy your weekend as well. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.